Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on CRM systems. So we've titled this webinar "Your CRM system doesn't have to suck." Might be a bit of an aggressive title, but we will explore a bit about how CRM systems ended up being too complicated, and maybe dive a bit into what can we actually do about this. So. My name is Sixten Schultz. I'm a partner at Quadrant Consulting, and for the last 10 years or so, I've been working on different sides of commercial operation. And I think most people that have worked in the commercial space will realize that you can't really avoid having interactions with CRM in one form or the other. So today we have 4 parts of this webinar. First, we're going to explore a bit about why do most sales reps hate their CRM system? What is it that we've done in the construct or in the ways of working that have led to this point? So we're going to explore that a little bit. Then we are going to take a look at our commercial tech stack and see, can we look at this from a new angle, a new perspective, and try to uncover a way to avoid having CRM being this behemoth of a system that nobody actually likes, nobody owns, and can get more out of it. And then lastly, if you are to embark on a CRM journey, what would be 5 design criteria or 5 processes that we would need to go through in order to get a truly loved CRM system? Lastly, of course, we want to get some questions from you to see if there's anything that we can answer, or if you have questions to the presentation in general. So, first of all, why do most people hate their CRM system? What is it that about the system that we don't like? Let's go a bit into that. So first of all, I think that there is a clear dichotomy of CRM systems. Talking to different businesses, to different executives, we do have a good understanding that CRM is critical for our business operations, whether that is in a sales function, a marketing function, a service function. It is absolutely a critical system. But we also seem to, when asking the people that actually use the system, we see that it is vastly disliked. It doesn't live up to the expectation. It is not an enabler of being able to do more productive or more effective work. So what is actually the breadth of CRM system? Is it something we really need to care about? Yes, I think so. Across companies that we work with, I have not encountered yet a company that doesn't work actively with the CRM system. And looking at the data, we can see that 91% of all companies that is above 10 employees, they work with the CRM system. They have one in place. They have a central storage where they are using their customer and relationship information. But on the other hand, we can also see that almost 17% of salespeople, they are reporting that the CRM system isn't really making their work any easier. It's not an active enabler of getting the salespeople to perform in any better way. So why is that? And has it always been that way? Our perspective is that a lot of things have changed over the last couple of decades in terms of how selling is actually conducted. It has become more complex. So, for example, we can see that there are much more people involved in the average purchase in the B2B realm from just 10 or 20 years ago. We also see that there is a much higher degree of customer self-education. So they are online, they're getting more informed, they're interacting with your company outside of the direct seller interaction. That kind of ties also together with the next point, that in general, purchases, they don't allocate the same amount of time to sales rep interactions as they did just a couple of decades ago. They're also more digital. They use virtual channels. They use face-to-face channels. They are using a much wider palette of interaction ways with your brand, so you're not in as heavy control of the direct interaction. And in general, we see that the buying process is becoming more and more complex. You go back and forth, your interaction with different vendors are exploding, and it's not this linear, smooth process. There's a lot of back and forth. So what does that actually mean for the salespeople and what they need to do in order to succeed in this new reality? What we see is that we ask the seller to have a lot of hats on in the modern B2B world. We have the seller being responsible for building the relationships, to have knowledge about the customer, about the industry, being able to have all of the right touch points, which have heavily increased. We see that we need the seller to be more of a guide in their product or services, to navigate different offerings, and being able to assist on helping on fairly technical, complex information, being able to advise and guide the different purchasers, whether that will be in the technical or user buyer or in the economic space, being able to really take a guiding approach. We also see that in order to impact and influence the entire interaction space, most sellers are required to be mini marketeers, analyzing the different channels, managing what is the indirect touch points, what can I actually do in order to influence that whole interaction space. And a closely related brother to that mini marketeer is that we're also requiring salespeople to be tech wizards. They need to optimize their tool usage. They need to optimize how they are using different technology platforms in order to actually interact with the customers. Then also we're asking salespeople to be like the coordinator role. They need to make sure that everybody internally is aligned. How do I make sure that the right information is the hand of the marketing people or the product organization, or how do I make sure that we have this data sharing or this common view of the account or the customer? And then lastly, we are also asking a lot of salespeople to document, to record interactions, to have the right overview, to provide reports, to provide the right communication to stakeholders. So salespeople are in essence required to do a lot more than what they used to do, where they were primarily the seller of a company. Sales have become increasingly complex. How do you accommodate that if you are a technology provider or a CRM provider? What we actually see is that a lot of companies, they have added on a lot of functionalities. They have created these ever-expanding portfolios of systems where you can have contact management, you can do your leads, you can have interaction, you can do pipeline tracking, you can do sales forecasting. And these doesn't even cover all. I mean, working with some of our customers, we've seen sales management requiring sellers to even send emails or manage projects within the CRM system, which it was never actually entailed to do. So we ended up with this Franken system of complexity where you are needing to manage all of your very, very complex interactions with all of the hats you need to wear as a seller into a one single system that was never really meant to do all of that. So as a result of this, we see that sellers are spending more and more time in CRM. So on average, we see that the sales rep are spending almost a full day per week, or 17% of his or her time, manually entering data and managing administrative tasks in the CRM system. Thinking about that as from a sales executive or a management point of view, you end up having fairly well salaried people spending a lot of the time not selling. And I think the latest data on that from Salesforce was that we spent 28% of time as sellers actively selling, being in interactions, having meetings. The rest is done on something else. So in the pursuit of efficiency, or in the pursuit of effectivity, and in the pursuit of having a sales force that is really productive and right-sized for the operation, we're actually paying them a lot of money to do what they never were meant to do. Also, when we then dig a bit deeper into this setup and ask the sellers, so what is your largest challenges in CRM? It's this manual entry of data. It's the time that they spend on actually populating and creating these right reports that is topping the list of things that they want to get rid of in order to be more productive. So in essence, we have a situation where we are having a lot of requirements to get the right reports and enforcing a lot of functionality and a lot of data logging into one system, where we're asking our sales reps to spend a lot more time to enter data than we used to. That also is a problem because a lot of the time, most of our interactions doesn't really happen in CRM. So the project management, the customer interaction is not really something that we do in CRM. As marketeers, how we set up our ads, how we are interaction or setting up our communications with the clients, it doesn't really happen in CRM. All of the planning, all of the account management is not really happening in CRM. So we're forcing a lot of interaction into systems that are not natively used by professionals in order to conduct their area of specialty. And moreover, we're asking them to do that in order to deliver a lot of reporting and a lot of monitoring reports for management that typically doesn't really trust the system. So talking to a lot of the clients that we work with, in general, we hear that, we don't really have the data integrity we're looking for in our system. We don't really have the trust in the data. And most often we see that there is a shadow IT or shadow reporting happening, where a lot of spreadsheets are where the real business is happening. So it's not really within this single source of truth, as most managers and most sellers realize that it isn't actually the truth. It's a version of the truth that we end up having in our CRM system. So all in all, that is our perspective on why we end up having a lot of salespeople not really liking their CRM system. So how can we look at this? What can we do about this in another way? We're going to dive a bit into how can we maybe change the perspective, and how can we look at the conditions of the CRM system through a new lens. So to get a bit of perspective to this, there's a lot of data, especially from IT companies or CRM providers, about why do IT projects fail. So looking at the latest resources from Gartner, almost half of CRM projects, they fail. But talk about failure, then what is that failure? So from a perspective of an IT vendor, or from a perspective of a purely functional CRM system, it's when the CRM system runs over budget. It's when it doesn't really have the functionality that you're looking for. It's when adoption rates are low, and when we cannot really live up to the data integrity criteria that we look for in our system. So that of course is one perspective of it, but that doesn't really translate into what does this mean for commercial leadership. And an interesting perspective, and I think that we also can recognize in the dialogues we have with our customers, is that we ask the wrong questions. Typically, the budget and the functionality isn't really what decides or what makes or breaks the commercial progression within CRM. So if we're changing the point of view a bit and say, what is a failure actually? But in our perspective, a failure is that CRM system is not an active part of helping the business grow. And if you ask sales executives about this, the answer is pretty clear, that almost 90% of executives asked, they are not seeing CRM as a driver of business. That is a huge problem, as CRM systems are not really meant for having this over-exaggerated database. It's not a reporting function. CRM systems are meant to drive revenue growth for businesses, and that is where we should focus on. But the problem is that we have, with all of these disparate touch points, we have a lot of need from management to see reporting what happens, what's the overview of our different activities. And the problem is that most don't have the hands-on experience with the CRM system and doesn't know how to get that information in the right way. We also see, back to the first part, that we just end up filling endless amounts of input fields in order to suffice some data need that is defined by someone, and we don't really know why it needs to be so complex. The main reasons we see that this is happening is that we have three drivers that we're going to uncover a bit of this status quo. Why hasn't this changed? CRM systems have been around for decades, but the problem still persists, that we end up in a situation where we are not really getting the business growth out of our system. We see complexity, so this over-engineering of processes, of data, of reporting demands being part of this. We see that lack of ownership when a CRM system becomes a communal tool, a communal pool of information that everybody should use, then nobody takes ownership of actually maintaining and building up the right integrity of the system. And then that we have a focus very much on data over processes. We don't really enable the business operations to have a support system in place. So that is the drivers that we're going to dive a bit more into. So looking again at CRM, what was that abbreviation again? It is customer relationship management. It is that we should be focused at managing our relations, fueling business growth. But far too often we see that CRM actually becomes a victim of its own capability, and with a lot of these larger houses in Salesforce and Dynamics and SAP, we end up with hugely complex systems where we try to have everything in one place. We use it a lot for inspection, and I think that's also a result of this increasing complexity. We have newer functions, we are doing some field sales, we have inside sales, we have marketing, we have a lot of different ways we're interacting with our clients, and to manage that, a lot of demands are, we need to have the right reporting, we need to know what is happening here and there. And I'm pretty sure that most of you guys have opened up a CRM system and been completely paralyzed by the amount of input you need to do fairly simple operations. So instead of having to focus on this inspection, on progress reporting, on making sure that we have the right forecast, providing the right visibility, predict delivery dates, have the overview, and have all of this business intelligence, we should create the improvements in the sales process. We should create the improvement in the buyer journey and the customer journey, so we get more value out of our system. So one of the main drivers of this status quo, of not having systems that actually work for us, we end up working for the system because of a lot of this complexity and demands. Another point we made is like, who is responsible for the CRM system actually? In this like ocean of functionality, we end up serving everyone across the organization, or at least the front line. And this commercial tech enablement that goes through the interactions, so how do we actually communicate with our clients, all the way down to how do we analyze and how do we coach our people, all of that functionality we try to force into one system. The result is more often than not that if you ask sales managers about, so how do you actually use the system? I use it to get these reports, I use it to plan some of my coaching sessions. That's all great. So you own that part? No, it's actually the IT department that owns the CRM system. And there's nothing wrong with having the IT department own part of the system, but we need to be fairly diligent about making sure that the actual business users of a certain business functionality also have the ownership of that. And having everything into one suite of system that is overly complex challenges that a bit. So how can we actually empower the business people to take more ownership of that? That is a key thing to get in order to drive adoption and also support of the CRM system, and try to mitigate some of this shadow IT. Just a point on shadow IT, it's also always mentioned as some of this evil that we want to avoid. I don't necessarily think it is. I think it's about we have two fixed restrictions that everything needs to be in the CRM system. If that is the approach, then we see now, no, because that is not how business is conducted. We should focus on the people and make sure that we are using how we're actually working. How do we interact with our customers? How do we manage our projects in real life? And then try to knit that into our system the other way around. So by no matter where you are in this commercial tech enablement space, it's important that we define and empower the owners of each of these points. Then lastly, there is this focus of data over process. In many of the clients that we work with, there is either a too restricted process to what should be in the system, or there's no clear owner where everything just explodes. And I think one of the main issues with that is that many have a perspective on CRM being more of a glorified database where we have all of our information stored, and not really focusing on supporting the business processes that we have in place. So whether we are going in marketing and it's lead generation, whether it's having the right target accounts, whether it's the segmentation or similar, we need to make sure that we have a common view of the process and that we drive that process that process from A to C and support that. So that is one of the ways that we really should focus on the process and empower the journey. So it's not really about the data, but about the unique processes. In doing so, we can change the perspective from being this database to actually help achieving the goals and giving the right insights into our processes, what works, what doesn't work, and have this continuous improvement loop. It's also important that the process is not just the sales process, or it's not just the marketing process. Everything is interconnected in how we are doing our business, from marketing to sales and also to service. And therefore, it's important that when we are setting up our system, that we take the holistic view and make sure that we really focus on these handover interaction points and have clear agreement about how we do, and then make sure that the system empowers that in the right way. Another thing about the process is that CRM systems typically is something that you're onboarded into, and then you don't get any training. But that's not really how business is conducted. Over time, processes do change. What we do change, and in order to make sure that we are always on top of that, we need to make sure that we take training and updates seriously across our functions, so we're always aligned on how do we do things, and that goes for the cross-departmental talk as well. So how do we do that? How do we take a new look at this and enable these both processes? Try to limit the complexity, and how do we enable and empower the business users? For us, it's about taking on this new role of a CRM system. That a CRM system shouldn't be everything. It shouldn't be everything. We should try to make a decoupling of data and functionality. We see CRM systems were successfully implemented more and more as a data system, so a central repository, a single source of truth that then enables the interactions. We need to focus way more on building and enabling the marketing people to do their marketing activities where it makes sense, to enable sales to do their sales activities, manage their accounts and their projects where it makes sense, and make sure that our service people after sales are using the tools that are natural to them in order to make sense. But we still need to maintain the right overview. So through a content layer where, of course, we produce some ads, we have some sales assets and also some service collateral, we need to make sure that the footprints that we're setting in our interactions is pushed back into a central data system. So, for example, that when we're doing our outreach to our clients, that we don't necessarily force people to log calls through an IP telephone and have it all live inside the belly of a CRM system, but that we enable them to do what they do best and then have the smart data flows go back and document into the data system. By doing so, we should have a composable approach to the CRM system and have the flexibility to change. And that was the last part of this continuous training, because what you do today is not necessarily what you would do tomorrow in terms of tools, in terms of having CRM systems or commercial tech enablement in place. So by decoupling this data from the actual user interface, we enable some more flexibility where you can change stuff without breaking up your process support. You can change your mailing system, you can change your sales enablement system, and that gives us the right footprints in order to have the reporting needs that still are relevant. Yeah. So how would you go about this? How would you go about making sure that you can have a setup that allows you to drive this? We have looked at it's a complex journey for sure, and there's many things that you can do right in order to get more value out of your system. But if you are to embark on a journey where you are to revisit your CRM system, we have identified 5 design criteria that would benefit most organizations. First of all, we want to start with the people, more or less, and that is by not having to set a platform and then force everything into there. We need to understand how all stakeholders in the front line is actually working in the day-to-day operations. What platforms do they use? What data do they use? And how do they actually work? And then we need to structure that into a process with structured business processes that are clearly defined across the A2C landscape of the commercial operations. And then, of course, most of the time we need to influence how people work, because in larger organizations this can vary a lot from region to region or by function to function. So agree upon what is the common process that we want to drive. This is one of the main challenges of having an efficient CRM system, to get this right and linking the people, how people work, into a common process. And first there we need to make sure that we empower the platform and have a common source of data where we can have the right records that can fuel the reporting and the change and the insights we actually need to establish this loop. So instead of assuming that everything must live inside the CRM platform, that's an unrealistic vision and that doesn't work in practice. So let's start by looking at the use cases, looking at how people actually work in order to empower the adoption of the system. Because if we don't, then we end up having a lot of people that are not willingly supporting using the CRM system, and they're working in other ways where we miss the overview and we miss the insights that are relevant for us. Then we also think that in designing this, we definitely need to take a hard look at data and hard look at how we can simplify to the greatest extent possible. For some reason, we end up with CRM systems being this, it's comfortable to have a lot of data and a lot of interaction points on people, but an exercise that is extremely important and also relevant is to look at what do you actually use of the data that you have? What is actually a part of empowering the business process? And just an example of one of the recent clients that I've been working with, that almost 65% of the stored records that were in the system, that goes across the accounts, that goes across the contacts, were not used. They were not opened, they were not edited, they were not monitored. So we more or less had so much information that were not an active part of our day-to-day operation, that it was just completely flooding the system and creating a lot of complexity. And moreover, we also had the 91% of the records that were used had irrelevant and outdated information. So even though we had some usage of 35% of the data, Not all of the data were used at all. And just a side note here, it's not just that the data isn't used for anything that drives revenue or drives growth. It's also that we end up storing a lot of information that we might not actually be allowed to store. So it's not just a revenue issue, it's also a compliant issue to take a hard look at. We talked a bit about it earlier in the webinar, but there's also really a focus to design your system where CRM is more of a commercial master data than an actual user interface. So instead of having these typical setups where you have some functionality that are closely tied together with direct integrations, making sure that data goes from A to B to C, we need to move more into a system where we are liberating the frontline people to use the systems that they want, and then storing and reporting the data down in a single source of truth in the CRM overview. Now the arrow goes only one way down. It's of course also it could go the other way around, that some of the tools, whether in sales or in marketing, that the technology is also drawing upon information in the CRM landscape. But where the integration is not really point to point, that adds complexity, but the integrations happen down into the single source of truth where we can leverage that data more. That will also enable that flexibility, or easier to change out components of your architecture or your landscape. And fourthly, a lot of organizations that we meet they have a view of themselves as being truly unique, and have ended up spending millions and millions on configuring custom components in their business processes that doesn't really benefit them at all. I think most companies should take a hard look at themselves and realize, are we really that special? Where do we need to have this customization? Because chances are, at least across the commercial process, that most of the time there is standard functionality for that. You're not that unique. You're not the only company in the world with this issue or this process. And most of the time you can live off of configuring standards instead of customizing. And what we also see, that if you end up with this configuration, time to make changes is exploding. So if you want to test out new functionality, if you want to do something different, you end up having some sort of a governance wall where, yeah, we can't really do that because it needs to go into this. So we'll write a ticket and then you can test the functionality in 6 months. But 6 months often end up being a decade in commercial terms. You need to test it now, and we need to enable ourselves to be more adaptable. And by doing this configuration primarily and not customization, we're empowering the business people to test out new functionality themselves via the configuration, not rely on a larger IT operation to enable you to do it. Yeah, and these customizations, again, it creates some unclear connection points where you become interdependent on processes. If you want to adapt, we need to be able to do that in a standard configurative way, and not going through complicated interaction points. Then lastly, we would see that a design criteria for a loved CRM system is also that we tailor the experiences. Way too often we have one suite of access into a large system, whether that's Dynamics, Salesforce, or any of the larger providers, where you're seeing the same thing, your experience is the same. So as an inside sales rep, you end up having this ocean of information and complexity that is not really driving adoption. No commercial person is by heart a true technical geek that would love to have everything and all the possibilities in the world. So we need to slim down and create tailored experiences so that the salesmen just have the views and the content that they need, that the account managers have a unique view. So we need to specify the right views and the right functionality into who actually needs what information to drive their revenue and to drive their own processes forward. So in doing so, we can greatly improve the adoption of the system. So you don't need to navigate yourself in an ocean of functionality, but you can focus on what matters to you. We should invest in making the employee experience of the CRM system as great as humanly possible. That was the overview of the design criteria I had to you today. So wrapping a bit up, we have a situation where we see that CRM is implemented everywhere. Everybody acknowledges the importance, but we also see that commercial people are not really that excited about using the system. It's not really a driver of their growth. We also see that we've set up a CRM to be this holistic monster that will take on all functionalities in the world, instead of empowering the unique business processes or the unique application needs of our different commercial functions and then tying back the system. And we argue that we should look at CRM a bit more as a master data function than having the functionality or the user interface to service everyone. So wrapping up, we should design our system, take departure in our people, understand how they work, create the right processes, and then make sure that the data foundation are there. Radical simplicity, make sure that the interactions are as simple as possible, that you only have the data you need, not all the data in the world. Make sure that we are using and empowering the frontline by allowing them to have the different systems that they want. Be as standard as possible. Don't customize everything. Take a hard look and ask yourself, where do I truly need to customize? Where am I truly unique? And then make sure that you're customizing the experience to the people that use the system. So now we have some time for some of your questions regarding this webinar. You can ask some questions in the chat, and then we can take it from there. Yeah. I get a question. So what is your perspective on AI application in CRM? It's a great question, and I think that there is a lot of value in AI empowering, enabling us to do more, enabling us to do less, and also being able to search better around our system. I think my mental model is that we need to separate a bit between what is driving efficiency and what is driving effectivity. I think we have. I read recently a book called the Sales Innovation Paradox that really is spot on. I think on here that over time we have enabled sales reps to send even more mails. We've empowered them to do more with their time than we've done ever before. But the conversions that we're seeing are declining to become less effective. So in this pursuit of efficiency, of getting a lot more output, we tend to lose sight of effectivity. And I think what AI is a great way to get a lot of efficiency, to get more output, more throughput, but we need to focus on the processes, need to focus on how do we get better effectiveness of our setup. So we're not just doing the right things more or less and doing more of that, but that we're doing the things right, so we can get the right conversions and we can get the right overview to drive an effective and efficient organization. So definitely do that, but I would really start with making sure that we are empowering the right process to have an effective CRM landscape. Do you suggest having UI in a different system extracting info from a CRM database? Is the next question. Yes, I definitely do. So I don't necessarily think that it's not necessarily the UI, it can also be different tools, but I think that the proper way to empower the commercial teams or the commercial operation is that we should allow them to work in the space that is natural to them, whether that could be, so I have an example from a recent client where we have commercial teams working together with the client in Teams, and not in their Salesforce implementation. That should be okay, but we need to make sure that the output and the updates that we use in Teams are pushed into the Salesforce system so we can suffice the reporting needs and get the overview. The same goes for marketing. It's super difficult to run ads and optimize campaigns inside of a CRM system. We should use that in a separate UI, both extracting the information from a CRM, the single source of truth, but also pushing relevant information or updating information the other way around. Low practicality. There is a lot of it might sound like this is a huge IT project where we need everyone involved, but most often we can do a lot with standard connectors and connectivity through the systems to make sure that we are empowering this. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. We can do it with standard integration functionality as well. Then regarding configure custom, thanks a lot. Regarding configure versus customize, I believe Salesforce.com customization is really a need. I think it really depends on how do you view customization versus configuration. I'm 100% aware that you can't just take Salesforce vanilla and then start working with it, but I would not. Where I see customization is where you go in and change actual code, where you go in and change actual properties of the system and start to customize entities. So for example, Salesforce.com, I think you definitely need to customize what are the views, what are the data points, what are the processes, but that I see more as a configuration. What you don't want to end up doing is build up your own entities for contract management, for example. There is standard functionality for that. So you definitely need to tailor the system, and especially also Salesforce, to your business processes, to your views. But that tailoring, we can get a long way with configuration and not via customization that builds up technical depth and dependency over time. So that would be my point of view, that we definitely need to configure, but we don't necessarily need to go into deep technical customization. Then I also see a question here. So how would you go about initiating this process? I seem to get a lot of pushback from IT to make any changes. It's a great question. That is definitely something that I can recognize. I think in some of the same studies that we reviewed here, it was 44% of people that want to, of sales executives that say they want to re-engineer their process, they want to do something, that they get a lot of pushback. And that is typically because you have a lot of this complexity involved. And that is because you end up saying, can we change this process? I need a new step, or I need an integration here. That it becomes this ticket we talked about that is then placed in a development sprint, and before you can get anything done, you end up spending these 6 months of development time, and that I think is a telltale sign of a overly complex system. So in that case, it is about mobilizing the right leverage both across the commercial organization and taking ownership of your commercial application, which your CRM system is. So across the marketing, across sales, across service, to make sure that you want to take ownership and that you are partnering up with IT and saying, this is becoming too much of a hassle, both for you and for us. Can we do something? And then try to engineer that. A lot can be done with simplification and customization, but if you are really in the depths of complexity, then you need to do something. I think it was also 50% of the sales executives asked about the CRM process. So how would you go about changing something? Their recommended process is to completely re-engineer the system or re-implement the system, because often that seems as the only viable option. It's not always the case. We can get a lot with simplification, but sometimes we definitely need to re-engineer from scratch. I can see that we are out of time, so there's a couple of more questions that I will try to recap when we're sending something out to you. But for now, thank you, and thank you for participating this morning. I hope it has been valuable for you to get a new perspective on how we can build a CRM system that is driving revenue growth and that is empowering the commercial teams. Thank you.